The Honorable Deputy Premier.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of the opposition, ministers of the cabinet, ex officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed.
Administration of oaths and affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Annual report for the entire public sector for the year ended 30th of June 2016 to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to you. Good morning, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I beg to lay on the table of this honourable House the entire public sector's annual report for the financial year ended 30th of June 2016.
So ordered. Is the member intending to speak thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would. Sorry. Can you let me have that? Yeah, please. See there. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the annual report for the entire public sector, the EPS, that I have just tabled, provides financial information with respect to core government itself, and it also provides financial information with respect to statutory authorities and government-owned companies, or SAGCs, for the financial year ended 30th of June 2016. The core government and its SAGCs are referred to collectively as the entire public sector, or EPS. Mr. Speaker, the Statement of Financial Position at the 30th of June 2016, found on page 46 of the report, shows that the EPS ended the financial year with $2.5 billion in total assets, $1.3 billion in total liabilities, and remainder being $1.2 billion net assets. The Statement of Financial Performance for the year ended 30th of June 2016, found on page 47 of the report, shows that during the year the EPS earned $944 million in operating revenues, incurred $797.1 million in operating and financing expenses, Other gains amounted to $1.6 million. The resulting overall operating surplus for the entire public sector was $148.5 million for the year. The statement of cash flows found on page 48 of the annual report shows that the net cash inflows from operating activities totaled $233 million during the year. The net cash outflows used by investing and financing activities totaled $191.7 million and $35.9 million, respectively. These amounts all net to an increase in cash balances during the year of $5.4 million, and with a $226 million cash balance at the start of the year, the entire public sector ended with an overall cash balance of $231.4 million at the 30th of June 2016. Mr. Speaker, the amount of $231 million represents cash balances of the entire public sector at June 30th, 2016, but specifically only to those balances being held in current accounts, savings accounts, and, the important distinction, fixed deposits, which have a maturity that does not exceed 90 days. However, the overall cash balances of the EPS far exceeded the $231.4 million when account is taken of the significant fixed deposits, which have maturities that exceed 90 days. Within the statement of financial position, or which we know as the balance sheet, fixed deposits that have a maturity or term that exceeds 90 days are shown and classified as investments and not as cash and cash equivalents. Note 7 on page 77 of the annual report indicates that investments consisting of fixed deposits that have a maturity of term greater than 90 days but less than 365 days totaled $326.7 million at June 30th, 2016. Hence, an overall total for the bank account balances of the EPS at 30th of June 2016 would be $558.1 million, made up of the $231 in cash and cash equivalents and $326 million that's included in investments. Mr. Speaker, the public debt of the EPS stood at $593.2 million at the 30th of June 2016. This is indicated in great detail found in note 17, found on page 95 on the annual report. Of this amount, the core government's debt amounted to $503.3 million at the 30th of June 2016. Mr. Speaker, the government must arrange and order its financial affairs and position so that it satisfies the principles of responsible financial management. These are set out in Section 14 of the Public Management and Finance Law. The framework for fiscal responsibility, popularly referred to as the FFR, gave the government until June 30th of June 2016 to comply with the various ratios that constitute the principles. Mr. Speaker, it was perhaps the singularly most important fiscal accomplishment of the previous government to have complied with the principles by 30th of June 2016, resulting in a subsequent position that the island's budgets no longer require prior approval of the United Kingdom government before they are presented in our legislature. At page 29 of the annual report, it is clearly indicated that the government was in compliance with the principles. The requirement that an operating surplus should exist was abundantly satisfied by a core government operating surplus of $130.3 million. The need for there to be a positive net worth was adequately met by core government having a net worth of $1.2 billion at the 30th of June 2016. The requirement that the debt service ratio should not exceed 10% of core government revenue was also satisfied, since the debt servicing ratio was 9.4% for the year. And the need for government to have cash balances measured at their lowest level during the year that are able to meet at least 90 days of operating expenses was also satisfied, since government had cash balances that covered 109 days of operating expenses, exceeding the requirement by 19.1 days. And another ratio that the government must satisfy is that its net debt should not exceed 80% of its revenues. The government satisfied this ratio by the net debt position at the 30th of June 2016 being 33.8% of its revenue. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the Auditor General's opinion on the consolidated financial statements. On October 19, 2017, the Auditor General issued an adverse opinion on the EPS financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2016. Within the annual report, the Auditor General's opinion starts on page 41. Mr. Speaker, I wish to provide some details on most of the significant matters that led to an adverse opinion by the Auditor General. First was the exclusion of the Public Sector Pensions Board from the EPS consolidated financial statements. Mr. Speaker, the 2015-16 EPS exclude the Public Service Pension Board, as the government is of the view that such substantial net assets are being held in trust for pensioners and public servants, and therefore ought not to be consolidated with the assets of the core government and SAGCs. The Auditor General opines that the government has control over the Public Service Pension Board by virtue of its ability to appoint persons as directors of the Pensions Board. The office further states that since the EPS financial statements are prepared using IPSAS, or International Public Sector Accounting Standards, there is a requirement on the IPSAS 6 entitled Consolidated and Separate Financial Statements that any entity within which the government can control, evidenced by government's ability to appoint directors to the Pensions Board, ought to have its transactions and balances consolidated with those of core government and its SAGCs. The Ministry of Finance disagrees with the viewpoint and has excluded the transactions and balances of the Pension Service from the EPS consolidated financial statements on the grounds previously alluded to that such matters are being held in trust for the pensioners and public servants, and therefore ought not to be consolidated with the transactions and balances of the government. Since these transactions and balances so excluded are very significant, underlying pension funds are in excess of $800 million, this technical accounting disagreement is one of the most material reasons for the issuance of the adverse opinion by the Auditor General. The Ministry of Finance will continue to discuss and engage with the Audit Office with a view to removing this qualification point. As an example of government's attempts to move this qualification matter from financial years after the 30th of June 2016, in March 2017, the Legislative Assembly passed an amendment to the Public Management and Finance Law, providing that the statements of this Pensions Board are not to include the financial statements of the three public sector pension funds. The amendment was made so as to reduce the materiality of the disagreement point. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, there is the understatement of retirement benefit liabilities. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General concluded that the consolidated liabilities of the government are understated. Government has not recognized on the face of its primary financial statements, in this case the statement of financial position, the $1.4 billion of net liabilities arising from its post-retirement healthcare obligations. The obligations arise from the fact that government will pay for the healthcare costs of civil servants when they retire, provided certain conditions are met by the civil servant. Obligations also arise due to government paying for healthcare costs of eligible dependents and of the retirees. In common with many other advanced jurisdictions, the government has provided details of its post-retirement healthcare expenses and liabilities in the notes to its financial statements, as opposed to recognition in the primary financial statements. And this is done by Note 16, which starts on page 91 in the annual report, thereby providing the readers of the financial statements with the adequate details of this important matter. Third are inaccuracies arising from opening balances and subsequent adjustments. Mr. Speaker, as at the 19th of October 2017, the date of the Auditor General's opinion, certain subsidiary audits were still in progress and not completed. Additionally, there were material adjustments arising from completed audits which were not known and therefore not posted at the time the EPS consolidated financial statements were prepared and sent to the Audit Office for audit. The overall impact of incomplete audits of certain core government entities and certain SAGCs at the time of preparation of the EPS financial statements is to cause uncertainty as to the accuracy of amounts in the EPS, which in turn has led to this factor being another reason contributing to the Auditor General's adverse opinion. Mr. Speaker, much improvement continues to be made yearly with respect to timeliness and quality of financial statement preparation. The government firmly believes and is committed that incomplete audits at the time of the EPS financial statements will not be a permanent or ongoing reason for audit opinion qualifications. Next, Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General also has stated that the lack of a fully comprehensive valuation report to support the $128 million carrying value in the financial statements of the road network throughout the islands is another reason contributing to the adverse opinion. The Auditor General also makes the observation that significant parts of the road network have not been valued and is therefore not reflected in the financial statements. Therefore, the assets of the government are understated with respect to this matter. Mr. Speaker, this is another area that government endeavours to rectify in future financial years. Mr. Speaker, the accounting policies used by SAGCs to measure land and business, Auditor General found, are inconsistent with the policies used by core government. IPSA 6, which I referred to previously, consolidated and separate financial statements, requires consistent accounting policies to be used within the consolidation, and therefore the consolidated figures for property, plant, and equipment is materially misstated due to the absence of revalued carrying amounts for certain classes of property, plant, and equipment owned by the SAGCs. And Mr. Speaker, our aim is to avoid this qualification factor for financial years after the 30th of June 2016. Next, Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General also highlighted the incompleteness of revenues, receivables, and earned revenue. The Auditor General was unable to derive sufficient audit evidence itself, nor did it receive adequate representations from core government entities and SAGCs as to the completeness of public sector revenues. Given the significance of the amounts involved, for example, the coercive revenues of the EPS for the year to June 30th, 2016 are reported at $673 million. The Auditor General's Office was unable to conclude on the completeness of coercive revenue, unearned revenue, trade, and other receivables at the 30th of June, 2016. Understandably, this presented another reason for Auditor General to issue an adverse opinion. Mr. Speaker, during the 2018 financial year, the Ministry of Finance will plans to seek external professional advice to address the important aspect of revenue completeness for the public sector. Mr. Speaker, the adverse opinion on the 2015-16 entire public sector consolidated financial statements is the third audit opinion that has been issued on the EPS financial statements since the PMFL was introduced in 2004. Adverse opinions were also issued in 2013-14 and 2014-15 entire public sector statements. Therefore, progress has been made despite the existence of an adverse audit opinion for the 2015-16 financial year. because for 9 of the years during the period 2004 and 5 to 2015-16, an audit opinion could not be rendered by the Audit Office at all. Mr. Speaker, government continues to make significant progress in addressing the concerns reported by the Auditor General. It is envisaged that most of the remaining issues that have contributed to an adverse opinion on the 2015-16 entire public sector consolidated financial statements will be addressed by the financial year ending the 30th of December 2019. It is important to note that adverse opinions on public sector consolidated financial statements are not uncommon for many developed countries. However, the government of the Cayman Islands is not content with the present audit opinion, and it is our goal to achieve, at a minimum, a qualified audit opinions on the entire public sector consolidated financial statements with respect to the financial year ending 31st of December 2019. Such a qualified audit opinion on the EPS financial statements would put us on par, at least, with that achieved by the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, clearly we have a lot of work to do. The EPS annual audit for the year ended 2016, the 30th of June, is available on the Ministry of Finance's and Economic Development's website, www.mof.gov.ky. Finally, Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that not only has the government given the fullest possible account of its financial stewardship, but it continues to increase the amount and quality of public sector financial information being provided to the public. As a further illustration of the enhancement of the provision of financial information, government last year amended the PMFL to require the provision of financial information on its activities and financial position on a quarterly basis. The very first quarterly report is due to be gazetted by mid-May 2018 with respect to the January to March quarter. The 2015-16 financial year marked the first time the requirement to produce annual reports inclusive of financial statements was enforced for the entire for each public sector entity. Additionally, for the 2016-17 financial year, all government entities were required to submit their annual reports at the same time as their financial statements were sent to the Auditor General's office. This means that each of the 15 ministries, portfolios, and offices that constitute the core government and the 26 statutory authorities and government-owned companies will all provide the public with more and better quality information related to their operations, activities, and achievements to allow the public to have an enhanced understanding of the public sector. Mr. Speaker, I commend the EPS report for the financial year ended 30th of June 2016 to all honourable members of the Legislative Assembly and to the general public. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Portfolio of the Civil Service, Annual Report 2015-2016, to be laid on the table by the Acting Deputy Governor, ex officio member responsible for the portfolio of the Civil Service.
Honorable Acting Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to table in the Legislative Assembly the annual report of the portfolio of the Civil Service for the year ended 30th of June 2016.
So ordered. Is the member intended to speak thereto?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present the annual report of the portfolio of the Civil Service for the year ended 30th of June 2016. Section 44, subsection 5 of the Public Management and Finance Law requires that ministries and portfolios prepare their annual reports and table them in the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the POCS prepared its financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2016 and submitted the same to the Auditor General within the established deadline. The Auditor General issued an unqualified or clean opinion on the POCS financial statements for the period. An unqualified opinion means that the financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the POCS as at 30th of June 2016 in its financial performance and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with the International Public Sector Accounting Standards. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this time to thank the team across the portfolio of the Civil Service, and in particular the Chief Financial Officer and her team for their hard work in achieving this outcome yet again. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to highlight some key financial information in respect to the portfolio of the Civil Service for the period. Total operating revenue was $8.5 million, total operating expenses $7.5 million, with a net surplus of $1 million. Total assets at $6 million, total liabilities at $4.1 million, with a total net worth of $1.9 million, and our cash and cash equivalents at the end of the period, $4.1 million. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to briefly highlight some of the key achievements of the portfolio over the 2015-16 financial year. The POCS successfully supported the approval of the following legislation: the Public Service Pensions Amendment Law 2016 and Public Service Management Amendment Law 2016 to facilitate increasing the retirement age within the public sector to age 65. This was achieved after significant consultation, Mr. Speaker, including face-to-face meetings with hundreds of our civil service managers, HR professionals, and employees. The Parliamentary Pension Amendment Law 2016, the Judges' Emoluments and Allowances Amendment Law 2016, the Anti-Corruption Amendment Law 2016, and the Whistleblower Protection Law 2015. The POCS also supported a number of good governance initiatives that had significant implications for these islands. The conditional release law and regulations came into effect in February 2016 as part of the government's crime reduction strategy to reducing reoffending. The Elections Committee completed the report of the Boundaries Commission, which was passed in the Legislative Assembly on 5th of October 2015, and which paved the way for the historical achievement of the Cayman Islands of contesting elections on the basis of single-member constituencies. The POCS was also able to effect, on behalf of the Cabinet, improvements to civil servants' pay through the provision of pay awards to our staff, including a cost of living adjustment, or COLA, of 4% in July 2015, which reversed the 3.2% pay cut originally adopted in 2010, and a one-off honorarium of 2.2% in June 2016. We were also able to obtain funding to rectify pay stagnation, commencing with payments to police officers and teachers in December 2015. Madam Speaker, we continue to take steps to improve the caliber of civil service leadership, and during the 2015-16 year, we were able to provide our staff with various leadership development opportunities, including hosting the Cayman Islands government's first leadership summit for over 100 leaders across the civil service. Mr. Speaker, as I reflect on the achievements of the portfolio during the 2015-16 financial year, I am grateful to all staff within the portfolio of the Civil Service for their dedicated work, and to all members of this Honorable House for their support. The team within the POCS are dedicated and committed civil servants who continue to work every day to make the lives of those we serve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Report of the Office of the Auditor General on the review of the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority financial statements for 2015-2016. Report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Office of the Auditor General on the review of the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority financial statements for 2015-2016. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for Northside, Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
The elected member for Northside, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Public Accounts Committee report on the Auditor General's review of the Health Services Authority financial statements for 2015-2016.
So ordered. Is the member intending to speak there at all?
Just briefly, Mr. Speaker, to read the recommendation sections of the report. Mr. Speaker, the recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee. The PSC called the witness sessions to question the reasons for the qualified audit opinion given on the 2015 and 2016 financial statements for the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority, HSA, and the HSA's response to those qualification points. The Auditor General also provided the committee with a report of those charged with governance on those matters arising from audit of the financial statements from the year ended 30th of June 2016. Under Section 7.1 and 18.3c of the HSA law, the Health Authority is required to maintain a cash reserve at a level of no less than estimated expenses for 90 days. The Office of the Auditor General roughly estimate that the authority is over 21.5 million short at 30th of June 2016 in meeting these requirements. The PSC remains concerned with outlook for the financial position and future audit opinions for the HSA in spite of the employment of outside consultants to support them. The PSC was not impressed by the continued assertions by the board chairman that the HSA will achieve unqualified audit opinions for the financial year 2018. The PSC strongly recommends that the board of the HSA urgently address the staffing issues unearthed during the hearings of the HSA financial statements. The PSC is gravely concerned with the quality and accuracy of responses to questions by the Chief Officer, Ms. Jennifer Ahorn, Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Lizette Yearwood, Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Heather Booth, and HR Director, Ms. Brenda Riley. In Ms. Ahorn's evidence to the PSC on Tuesday, the 10th of October 2017, as recorded in the verbatim of this minutes of this meeting on page 13, she misinformed the PSC, and I quote, the chairman, questioning, so the ministry is not concerned in that in changing members of the licensing authority that they may be more lenient, particularly with the command of English, since there is no standard established. That is a very subjective thing. Ms. Ahorn, Chief Officer and Permanent Secretary, Minister of Health, Environment, Culture, Housing, response. Mr. Chair, the changes of the various councils are cabinet decisions. The chairman, that is the problem. Ms. Jennifer Ahorn, cabinet has made, and they, the chairman, the political appointments. Ms. Jennifer Ahorn, I believe, and I don't have the list in front of me, but I believe that there has been continuity. I don't think that there have been a change, that we've changed the board wholesale. But again, I am speaking from memory and not from paper in front of me, and I don't know for certain. But certainly a recommendation from the ministry when appointments are being considered is to make sure that there is some continuity for that very reason, to ensure that there is some consistency from one to the next as those appointments are being made. These responses are contradicted by evidence obtained by the PSC, namely the Cayman Islands Gazette issue number 20, 2017, dated Monday, 25th of September, 2017, page 1453, under the title Government Appointments. And I quote, appointments to the Medical and Dental Council in accordance with Schedule 3, Constitution and General Proceedings, etc. of the Councils, the Health Practice Law 2017 revision. The following persons have been appointed to serve on the Medical and Dental Council effectively immediately until the 1st of September 2019. Dr. Louis Kona, Chair. Dr. Krishna Mani, Deputy Chair. Dr. Howard Irestone, Member. Dr. Darla Solomon, Member. Ms. Julianne Frederick, Member. Registrar, dated the 12th of September 2017. Signed by Kim Bullings, Clerk of the Cabinet. The evidence obtained by the PSC, namely the Cayman Islands Gazette issue number 62/2015, dated Friday, the 28th of August 2015, pages 26 and 27, under the title Government Appointments. Previous appointments to the Medical and Dental Council. In accordance with Schedule 3, Constitution and General Proceedings of the Council of the Health Practice Law 2013, the following persons have been appointed to serve on the Medical and Dental Council, effective 15 September 2015 until the 1st of September 2017. Dr. Sidney Ebanks, Chairman. Dr. Virginia Hobday, Deputy Chair. Dr. Nodé Dreyer, Member. Dr. Eugene Foley, Member. Mr. Wayne Cowan, Member. Ms. Lyra Joseph, Registrar ex officio. The PSC is of the view that this misinformation was knowingly done, that the Gazette notice was only 15 days old at the time the evidence was given. The PSC is also aware that the Chief Officer would be involved in producing the paper to Cabinet to request approval for these board appointments. The PSC asserts that changing all members of a board qualifies as wholesale changes. The PSC also has some evidence that these changes were made for specific purposes, some of which may not be in the best interest of health care of the Cayman Islands. The PSC has not charged the Chief Officer with contempt of the Legislative Assembly, but instead will refer the matter in writing to the Deputy Governor for him to take disciplinary action as he sees fit. The letter will refer to the relevant legislation that governs such behavior. However, given Ms. Ahorn's history with the PSC reserves the right to pursue the charge of contempt. The PSC is concerned with the practice of appointing persons who do not meet the advertised qualifications to positions of the HSA. Mr. Speaker, those are the recommendations of the PSC as relate to the Health Services financial statements 2015-2016. Thank you.
Report of the Office of the Auditor General on the social assistance programs. Follow up on the past PEC recommendations, July 2017. Report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Office of the Auditor General on the social assistance programs. Follow up on past PEC recommendations, July 2017. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for Northside, Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
The elected member for Northside, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I beg to lay on this table the report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Office of the Auditor General on the social assistance programs, follow up on past PSC recommendations, July 2017.
So ordered. Is the member speaking there at all?
Again, Mr. Speaker, just with your permission to briefly read the recommendations of the report. Mr. Speaker, the following are the recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee on the Auditor General's report that has just been laid on the House. 9.01. The audit and report of the Auditor General was a follow-up carried out in the Cayman Islands. The objective of the report was to assess the responses given in the government minute of October 2016 to determine whether, in the Office of the Auditor General's view, past Auditor General's report and PSC recommendations had been implemented. 9.02. The committee re-endorses the 12 recommendations previously made by the Auditor General and the additional 2 recommendations made by the PSC in 2015, as summarized in Appendix 2 of the report. The committee urges the government to implement the recommendations as a matter of priority. 903. The committee was concerned that KPMG was commissioned to prepare an outline business case that appears to only consider two options for welfare payments to those in need: keeping the current system in place, or two, moving to an integrated operation where social service recipients can go to a one-stop shop for all public assistance programs. 904. The Auditor General was concerned about the terms of reference given to KPMG for the outline business case work, as it did not address prior audit recommendations. The Auditor General stated that when the Office of the Auditor General audited this area in 2014 and 2015, it recommended government create an overall strategy to determine which were the policy objectives to be achieved by the social assistance programs. The committee agreed with the Office of the Auditor General's concerns and doubted that terms of reference for the business case provided value for money. 905. The committee recommends that the government consider the creation of a standard rate payment for welfare recipients, whether they are classed as indigent seamen, veterans, or those receiving temporary assistance. 906. The committee is concerned that the government is integrating systems that are not currently working, and it doesn't seem to be a plan to correct the issues that are not working in those units before integration, and we recommend the systems not be integrated. 906. The committee is also concerned that the Chief Officer in the Ministry had redirected the unit's budget for staff to recruit staff to deal with housing repairs, which exacerbated staff shortages. The committee recommends that staff shortages are rectified as soon as possible. The committee agrees that the Department of Children and Family Services and the Needs Assessment Unit were failed at the ministry level by the lack of any strategic policy dealing with social welfare. The PSC recommends that the Needs Assessment Unit and the Department of Children and Family Services remain separate entities whose function must be coordinated through policy from the Ministry, including the provision of adequate resources. Mr. Speaker, those are the recommendations from the Public Accounts Committee on the report. Thank you, sir.
As we have passed the hour 11 a.m., Honorable Premier, can you move the suspension, please? So that we can get into question time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of Standing Orders 23, 7, and 8 in order that questions may be taken after the hour of 11 o'clock.
The question is that standing orders be suspended in order for questions to be allowed after 11 a.m. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
The elected member for East End to ask Honourable Minister of Financial Services and Human Resources. Question number 15.
The elected member for East End.
Question number 15, standing in my name, is asked of the Minister responsible for national security. Can the Minister say, when will monitors for security cameras in the Eastern District be installed at East End and Northside police stations? And when will additional security cameras be installed in the Eastern Districts?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I answer the question, I just want to edify a statement that was made. I am Minister responsible for Home Affairs, which includes the Department of Public Safety Communications. and to assume that that includes all of national security is a misnomer. And I'm sure the member from East End made that statement without maybe that understanding, but just to ensure that the public knows national security falls squarely under the remit of the governor, but we have already indicated what we as a government would like to do. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, the answer. The national CCTV system is currently primarily monitored at the Department of Public Safety Communications locations. The justification for an investment in additional equipment to create secondary monitoring locations in East End and Northside police stations would largely be dependent on the availability of RCIPS resources to observe the cameras at these locations on a 24/7 basis. The director of the Department of Public Safety Communications, of which I will refer to as DPSC going forward, has recently discussed the opportunities for 24/7 CCTV monitoring at the East End and Northside police stations with the Deputy Commissioner of Police, Kurt Walton, who indicated that the RCIPS intends to have an officer resident at the Eastern District stations, but that the 24/7 manning of the station, and by extension the cameras, will require additional consultation with and commitment from the Commissioner of Police. In the event that the Commissioner is minded to provide a 24/7 monitoring at these stations, a business case could be made to install national CCTV monitoring hardware at these locations.
I hope so.
Mr. Speaker, forgive me, I'm not sure, in the process of responding to the answer, I can't remember if the member actually asked part 2 of the question as yet. And if he has not, I will reserve the response to that until he has.
No, A and B is there.
B, okay, so the part B of the question is with respect to the installation of additional security cameras. With funding, here the answer, Mr. Speaker. With funding that the DPSC received in the 2018 budget for CCTV upgrades, the director of DPSC has confirmed that it is feasible to install 2 camera pods in new locations, increasing the overall number of cameras in the Eastern Districts by 6, as there are 3 cameras on each pod. In order to identify the best locations for the 6 new cameras, the CCTV administrator will conduct physical and site assessments and consult with the RCIPS and other key stakeholders to gather all relevant public safety concerns.
Any supplementaries? Elected member for East End.
Speaker, I wonder if the Minister can tell us if there has been any request from police officers in the Eastern Districts for these monitors to be stationed at those stations, not for 24 hours monitoring, but for the purposes of efficiently solving crimes, especially robberies.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will need a moment to confer with the director of the DPSC to confirm whether any such requests have been made. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have been reliably informed by the Director that he has not received any official requests from the RCIPS to install monitoring at the East End or North Side police stations.
The elected member from East End.
Mr. Speaker, I think you are well aware, sir, that when those of us who have been here for some time are all aware that when these cameras were being installed, we extensively discussed it concerning the different phases. I think there were 3 phases, which included some 200-300 cameras. We are now going to 6 in the Eastern District. When will the full build out of this security system be completed?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I again will need to confer with the Director to get that information as requested. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I have been reliably informed that the phases that the member referred to actually should be the 2 phases that were contemplated, which was the phase for the rollout in Grand Cayman and then a phase for the rollout in the Sister Islands. As it relates to Grand Cayman, the original design, I have been informed, has been completed. However, there have been additional locations identified, and there have been additional rollout of those locations. And we are certainly committed to continue to work with the RCIPS to identify and continue to roll out any additional locations as may be determined necessary to ensure that we continue to address the issues of crime and crime prevention.
The member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I know my memory is not that bad. As I recall very specifically Mr. Bush coming here and answering those questions as to the entire program. And as far as I recall, there were additional cameras to be installed. I didn't know this question was on here because I have it on my computer, an email from him. I looked at it a few weeks ago. That additional cameras, Mr. Speaker, I need to ask the minister, on those cameras in East End, are they maintained on a regular basis?
Honorable Minister.
And Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence to find out the specifics on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I've been reliably informed that there is a regular maintenance schedule and that there is maintenance that takes place. But of course, during those times, there may be issues identified during the interim of when that maintenance schedule occurs. And so thus, if those issues are identified at that time, that they're dealt with.
Member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what can the minister tell us? First question is, what is the response time to repair cameras? When it is identified, what's the response time?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have been informed that the response time, once the issues have been identified, is normally within 4 to 6 hours. However, there has been an incident in the Eastern Districts recently relating to a lightning strike that actually required several components to be addressed, and so I believe that the response to address those have been longer than that time. However, there is, every day the DPSC receives some notification as it relates to the system in operation, and that information is then certainly passed on to be addressed to the maintenance team.
Last supplementary. Member from East End.
Mr. Speaker, I have witnessed the camera in East End off the pole for 2 months. Can the minister tell us whether or not it's time to change the equipment that was installed years ago. That is the cameras. And if they are considered fit for purpose at this stage.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for that question. The budget to do the upgrades that the Speaker or the member has intimated has actually been approved by this government and will be carried out in the coming budget term. There is anticipated to be an RFP out for tender shortly to replace both the inside and outside equipment. The equipment, I've been told, is certainly over 6 years old, so the government recognized and has budgeted for the appropriate upgrades to the system to be conducted shortly.
The elected member for Northside had indicated that he wished to ask a question. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the member could say there are 13 cameras currently in Northside, if I recall. 3 Rum Point at the intersection, 3 by Chisholm Store, 3 by the Old Man Bay Junction, 2 Frank Sound, 2 on the Queens Highway. How many times in the last year has all 13 cameras been out?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, given the specificity of the question, I do not have that information to hand, and the staff does not have that information to hand, but we would be happy to provide the information in writing to the member.
The Minister for, the member for Northside.
Can the minister say if 911 checks the performance of each of those 13 cameras on a daily basis? And could we have a copy of the log presented to us?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it has been confirmed to me that the cameras are checked daily and that the department can provide a spreadsheet of the fault reports that go out.
Member for Northside.
Can the minister confirm that based on that daily check, the response time to repair the cameras is 4 to 6 hours? And second question would be, is the monitor that was installed in the Bordentown Police Station, according to information provided to us in the Finance Committee, and the officers trained, is that monitor working, or do the police from the eastern districts have to come to Georgetown and apply through Gold Command to get access to the cameras for the Eastern Districts.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, dealing with the question about access, certainly I've been told that there is no need to go to Gold Command, which is Georgetown, in order to get access. And certainly since the inception of the National CCTV program, DPSC has trained and issued usernames and passwords to 145 police operators during the course. And so certainly the operation is based on having that training and username and password capability. So, and DPSC works with our CIPS to provide the training as and when needed and requested. I don't know if I've dealt with, I think the other question had to do with the Bordentown station. Again, I think given the specificity of the question and it not being directly related to the information or the questions that we are prepared to answer today, that is something that we'd have to probably get in writing to the member as well.
The member for North Side.
Given the revolving door of police officers, including commanders of the Eastern Districts, can the minister say how many of those 146 officers that are trained work in the Eastern Districts, and how often is training done for officers in the Eastern Districts?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I think given the level of specificity, the total numbers of training indicates all officers who have either been recommended or requested this training. Again, a breakdown about who currently is trained at those stations would need to be provided in writing to the member at this time.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister mentioned in her answer that there was going to be an expansion of coverage, I think general across the islands. Could she state how many cameras are currently located in the district of Bordentown, giving general information on where, and what the planned expansion is for Bordentown?
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been informed that there are currently about 50 cameras included in Bordentown, and that would include the prison site. And the issue, as I said before, the determination of the expansion would be in collaboration with our CIPS and in the overall strategy to address crime.
Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the minister then if she could put some pressure on having coverage expanded in Bordentown. I'll speak primarily for Newlands and I believe the Savannah area. Well, I speak for Bordentown West as well, because we have a situation now where we have citizens who are contacting the MLAs for assistance. We have a serial prowler in the Savannah, Newlands area who was routinely seen on the streets with a machete in his hand and a mask on, but we can't locate him. The police can't locate him because we don't have the evidence to suggest where he is when he is reported on the street. So it's becoming urgent. This person is becoming aggressive and going and knocking on people's doors with a machete in his hand. So it's as drastic as that. I'm not being dramatic, but I just want to say it as it is. We need more coverage.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can say that as it relates to, as the member says, putting pressure on the expansion, with respect to, you know, the fact, as I said, we are very concerned about crime, every single one of us in this chamber. And so not, you know, just the District of Bordentown, but certainly the District of West Bay, District of Georgetown, Northside, East End. So I will continue to do what I can. And of course, in the Sister Islands, looking squarely in that direction. I will continue to do what needs to be done to ensure that there is that working relationship and collaboration between the Department of Public Safety and Communications and the RCIPS in determining where and how best to expand and how quickly and efficiently we can do that.
And Honorable Minister, to save time and supplementaries, you're saying that for all districts?
Absolutely all districts, and I hope to have mentioned all.
I hope members would be satisfied and not each member from every district got asked. But question time, is there another supplementary? Minister, the bill member from Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you to the Honourable Minister. And I think this will also address all of us representatives in this House in regards to if consideration could be given in consultation with the Minister of Education and the police to consider installing speed cameras by the schools, West Bay Primary, Georgetown Primary, Savannah, Clifton Hunter, especially those very close to the road, Bordentown, Northside and East End, because this problem, Mr. Speaker, is renowned, and I keep complaining, begging, pleading, et cetera, to the powers that be. But I don't know if this would be in her ambit to give consideration to that.
Honourable Minister, I know that's outside of the area you're talking about. Perhaps you can pass it on to your colleague.
I certainly was going to make that suggestion, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for helping me in that way, along that way. That is something, again, that I would be happy to discuss with my colleagues regarding the concerns that the member has expressed.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question to the Minister, whether, not necessarily have to provide it now, but I'd just like to know exactly how many cameras are operating in the Georgetown area and whether all of them are operational. And I think I'm going to have to take this moment to highlight the recent increase of crime in the Prospect area. I know it's a major concern for those members, and I have to say it because I'm certain that some of the other members who have those concerns probably won't ask this question now because they're on the government side. So for their best interest, I'm assuming she's probably answered the question already, but there needs to be a considered focus there because there seems to be a crime element, unfortunately, starting to grow and fester in the Prospect area. So hopefully that area will be a consideration for expansion, and also to have the information in respect to how many cameras overall in the Georgetown area are operational, and just the confirmation that they're all working in good working order to be presented to me at any future moment would be fine. Thank you.
Minister?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, it had been reliably informed that for the Georgetown area, there would be anywhere between 90 to 100 cameras. Again, depending on where you consider the demarcation there. And certainly, we have been working as a government very closely with the member from Prospect to address the issues and concerns that have been raised. And as I indicated before, the monitors are all monitored on a daily basis from the central DPSC, and so they would be operational. They would be operational and subject to the same maintenance schedule, which is in place for all cameras.
Next question, please.
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs, question number 16.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I wish to ask question number 16 to the Honourable Minister for Financial Services and Home Affairs. Can the Honourable Minister provide a list of all new or changed retail and commercial banking fees and penalties introduced by Class A and Class B banking institutions in the Cayman Islands since 1st of January 2016?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The answer. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Financial Services and/or the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority has not historically maintained a list of commercial banking fees and penalties introduced by Class A and Class B banking institutions in the Cayman Islands. As a matter of practice, each Class A retail banking institution has historically posted its fee schedules on their individual websites. However, Mr. Speaker, since becoming Minister of Financial Services in June 2017, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority was asked to start collecting, collating, and publishing a comparative list of fees charged by the retail banks on the authority's website, which they have now done since November 2017 to enhance consumer awareness. This list can be found under the Quick List tab on CIMA's homepage and is entitled Banking Fees List. Class B banking institutions conduct the vast majority of their activities with other CIMA licensees or companies operating outside the Cayman Islands. Thus, the fees and penalties charged is therefore a private transaction agreed between the Class B banking institution and its customer. Hence, the fees and penalties and the increases thereof charged by Class B banking institutions is not collected, collated, and maintained by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority or any other government agency or department.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick follow-up. Is there any plan in place to begin the process of regulating these fees? And why I ask this is because it seems that as of late, there have been a lot of new fees introduced. And while they may be now showing up on the CIMA website, I don't think the average consumer is going to be aware of that. But the bigger concern is, Mr. Speaker, is and we hear the government talk about consumer protection. I think there needs to be now a heightened level of regulation as far as introducing new fees are concerned.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question and also for pointing out the fact that opportunities like this actually help us to inform the public about the new ability to be more informed about the fees going forward as it relates to the collection and collation of these lists that are now periodically updated as and when those fees are updated by the individual institutions. So I would certainly encourage the public, the wider public, to ensure that you log on to CIMA's website to get a copy of that list so you're able to better inform yourselves. As it relates to the issue of regulation, the government, and certainly through myself as minister in this area, I have taken a proactive approach to a meeting with all the Class A retail banks to discuss specifically the concerns related to fees, I've indicated that we are concerned, as everyone in this room, about the appearance of fees and the heightened fees, and we needed to understand what was driving some of the decisions taken. And the response has been, by and large, across the board. Obviously, the increase in fees has very much correlated with the increase in compliance and compliance-related activities that are required now as a result of the changing regulatory environment. So we will continue to actively monitor this situation. As I said, I have started a program of proactive engagement with the banking institutions to specifically address some of the concerns that have been expressed to me as minister by our constituents. And we will continue to see what we can do to ensure that there is rationale and reasonableness as it relates to these types of activities. Certainly, when you talk about the regulation, we do have to understand and appreciate that there are costs involved with providing the service of banking. Banking is not a public good, which some of us may think, but in the end, it is offered by a private institution, and so therefore, there has to be an ability to recoup costs to some degree. But again, it's making sure that we have rational decisions taken, and it is related to the requirements that the institutions now need to be able to adhere to from the regulatory perspective to be able to operate in our jurisdiction. So it's finding that balance, and we are certainly already engaged in those discussions.
The member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this may be a little bit unpolitical, but I would thank the Honourable Minister for at least going out and engaging the banks. I can tell from speaking to some of my former colleagues that they have been quite busy, as one, I'd use the term to me, pressure. So it is, I have to give credit where credit is due. I don't want to leave the impression that they're not trying to do anything, but my question to the Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, is that given government's buying power within the market, especially where some of these fees are concerned, and in particular, when I think about the many checks that are written each week by the court's office for child maintenance, and the fact that many of these banks are charging checks that are $60, $70 government checks, these $10 fees, which is quite expensive. As the government or cabinet consider using their buying power to say to these banks, or just pick up the phone and call the banks and say, listen, where these checks are concerned, especially the ones with children maintenance, we're asking you not to charge any fees to cash those checks. Because though I understand that some of them are actually going to local supermarkets to have the checks cash as opposed to going to the actual bank. So I'm wondering if that is something that the government would consider doing. Thanks.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Bordentown West for his acknowledgement, based on his own information and his own research, that we are certainly doing what we need to do to address these issues in a proactive manner, and also working with the institutions to ensure that they understand and appreciate the concerns that have been expressed. Specifically to the question that the member raised, I'm happy to report also that my colleague, the Minister of Finance, has recently held meetings with the local retail banks in regards to this specific issue that you have raised, the cashing of government checks. And I know that there certainly has been dialogue in that regard, and I also echoed and reiterated those concerns when I had the meeting with them. So the government is aware of those concerns and has already taken proactive steps to try to address it as well.
Next question. Sorry, one more supplementary from the member for North Side.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the member, I happened to be in a local bank a couple of days ago, and a tourist off the cruise ship walked up and stood in line for about half an hour. And when it just happened to come to the teller right next to me, I was in the senior citizen line because, you know, I'm over that point now. And he was asking the bank to convert what looked like $320 bills into CI. And the bank asked him if he had an account, and he said no, and they refused to convert the money. I think with the amount of emphasis that the Minister of Tourism is placing on increasing cruise tourism, I mean, if the man had had a paper bag full of money, I could see through it, but I'm fairly certain it wasn't the $100 that he had. And I tried, they did, I mean, it was almost, it was so abrupt, right? The way they treated the man, as if, you know. So I interrupted his passage and suggested to him that he mustn't be too concerned because the rate was fixed. And any store in town had to give him 80 cents for his dollar. And he appreciated that because he didn't understand the conversion rate. But I immediately reported it to CMA, and I don't think there's any rule that says you have to have an account at these banks for somebody like that trying to change money. And if we're going to, that's certainly not Cayman kind, is it, Mr. Minister of Tourism? So maybe you can have a word with the supervising authorities of the banks and see if some leniency can be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly will raise that concern as you have raised this, specific incident in my continued discussions and deliberations with the financial institutions.
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, question number 17.
Honourable member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I said a little prayer before I got up to ask this question because this one has been around from yes, sir, from 2013. I've been praying about this. I'd like to ask question number 17 to the Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure. Can the Honourable Minister state what progress has been made with making arrangements to complete the Church of God building in Bordentown as a hurricane shelter for the district?
Honourable Planning, Honourable Minister of Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you, I'd like to thank the member for the question. And I'm certainly not in the business of answering prayers. I did sleep at a Holiday Inn Express one time, but. Mr. Speaker, the ministry is in receipt of a valuation from DDL on the cost to complete the facility. Public Works had previously completed a valuation to this regard as well. However, Mr. Speaker, they are completing a cost comparison, if you will, between the two evaluations to advise government on the amount required to complete the facility as a hurricane shelter. Mr. Speaker, we anticipate this at any moment now, and in fact, I was just told that the comparisons were being sent over to the ministry this morning. After which, Mr. Speaker, we can make a decision on how to fund the facility, and I want to reassure the member this morning that the government is committed to finding a way to assist in completing the hall so that there is a hurricane shelter for the District of Bordentown.
Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first wanted to thank the Minister for that response. That is a partial answer to my prayer. But if we could establish, if he is in a position to give us a timeline, I know hurricane season this year probably isn't realistic, but if you could give us some sort of time frame on what the government, when the government expects that we would have the building at least ready as a shelter, not maybe 100% complete, but to serve as a shelter. Thank you.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are pushing on this as I can assure members at the Bordentown East member continuously reminds us of it as well. Mr. Speaker, I have not seen the scope of works, but I can tell you that it is in the $1.5 to $2 million range to complete it. This came from both the private sector valuation and the public works valuation. We are doing a scrubbing of that. We will be doing a scrubbing of that, that quotation or the estimates to make sure that all of the things are related to completing it as a hurricane shelter, not to complete it as a community hall or a church hall. So again, Mr. Speaker, once we have received the scope of works and the final cost, then we will try to find a way to fund it. I'll be taking it to my government, and I have instructed my staff to see whether or not this can be done in phases and to what stages we can get it to as quickly as we can.
Honorable Minister, I can pray. I can't speak, but if I could speak, I would ask you to consider my district too. The member for West Bay, sorry, for Bodtown, Bodtown West.
Mr. Speaker, you have me all over this honorable house. Well, Mr. Speaker, I will ask for your district too. So I'll ask the honorable minister to consider the speaker's district. But okay, nothing. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the honorable minister, would it be possible that once you have scrubbed the cost and should us organize a meeting with the 4 Bodtown representatives, because this is something that affects all of us. I think this is one thing that we definitely can partner with in terms of going out and even trying to raise money within the private sector to help offset the cost, because this is something that's urgent to us also.
Honorable Minister.
Get this done.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I'd like to thank the member for that suggestion. I'll certainly undertake to do just that, and that was another question that I asked my team this morning to find out whether or not the church itself had any further funding or in lieu of funding goods or services or whatever they may have had pledged to them, so that we can get have a comprehensive look at it. But I will certainly include the members.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honorable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs, question number 18.
Honorable member for Georgetown Central, the Premier has just stepped out a minute. Let's give him 1 second. Honorable member for Georgetown Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask you to be very careful. David already mad at me. I apologize. The honorable member from Georgetown West is already a little upset with me from yesterday, so I don't want to take his position. That being said, Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask the question on the order paper number 18. Can the honorable minister say what is the government's planned position and concerns on behalf of the citizens of the Cayman Islands that will be expressed at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that will take place in London on April the 16th of 2018?
The Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I respond substantively, I believe that it is important to provide the historical context on the relationship between the Cayman Islands and indeed other British overseas territories and the Commonwealth. Commonwealth membership is confined to sovereign countries who were at one point in history part of the United Kingdom. However, self-governing states and overseas territories linked to member countries are eligible to take part in many activities and may receive technical assistance from the Central Commonwealth Organization, namely the Commonwealth Secretariat. By way of brief example, the Cayman Islands has for many years participated in the Commonwealth Games, Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, projects and programs put on by the Commonwealth Secretariat, and in 1999 hosted the Commonwealth Finance Ministers meeting right here in Grand Cayman. It should be noted that within the Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK all have associated states and overseas territories. From time to time, representatives from these associated states and overseas territories may be invited to attend Commonwealth ministerial meetings and events, usually as part of the delegation of the member state to which they are linked. So, Mr. Speaker, unlike in CARICOM, where the UK overseas territories enjoy associate member status and can fully participate in the Heads of Government Conference, which is something you yourself has done during your tenure as Premier, and I have done in my tenure. Let it be clear that there is no associate membership of the Commonwealth available to the UK overseas territories. Neither is there a standing invitation to heads of government of UK overseas territories to participate in or even attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting as observers. Mr. Speaker, over the past several months, the UK Overseas Territories Association, or UKOTA, has been advocating for the UK government to include a representative or representatives from UKOTA as part of the UK's delegation to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. I recall that the matter was raised during discussions at the most recent Joint Ministerial Council meeting last November. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to confirm that the United Kingdom has responded positively to this request. Therefore, in my capacity as the recently appointed President of UKOTA's Political Council, I have been invited to attend 3 specific events at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which is, Mr. Speaker, planned for April of this year. These events are the welcome reception, the Lord Mayor's banquet, and the formal opening at Buckingham Palace, at which Her Majesty the Queen is expected to be present. In addition to attending the events to which I am invited on behalf of UKOTA, Mr. Speaker, I will also attend the Commonwealth Business Forum. The Commonwealth Business Forum is a unique platform for dialogue, bringing together business and government leaders from across the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth Business Forum is an integral part of the SHOGM, as it's called, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and brings together the businesses critical to trade and investment leadership with government leaders to debate the issues facing their countries in 2018 and beyond. The key themes of the Commonwealth Business Forum are accessing modern financial services, easing the pathway for business and growth, harnessing Commonwealth technology and innovation, creating a new attitude to sustainable business, mobilizing an export economy, and attracting inward investment. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, along with the Commonwealth Business Forum, will provide a truly global platform to bring greater awareness to the unique challenges facing many overseas territories, such as hurricane recovery, reconstruction and resilience, but also raise the awareness of the Cayman Islands as a global financial center and a business-friendly environment. It should also be noted that with the United Kingdom exiting Europe, many of the overseas territories serve as key gateways to trade with global Britain, and so the UK's relationship with the Commonwealth will likely be even more important. Therefore, the invitations I received to this year's Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting are indeed a very positive overture.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister say if there is any concerns that he tends to communicate and articulate to those who will be speaking on behalf of the overseas territories at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting? Because initially, that's the question is, are we expressing any concerns by way of our connectivity to the Commonwealth?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I've tried to explain, I am not attending on behalf of the Cayman Islands. I'm attending, and I've only been invited as president of UCOTA. We are not part of the plenary. We have no right of audience in the Commonwealth Heads of Government plenary meeting. Our focus is and will be, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the diplomatic work that we will do, engaged in the reception, the banquet, and the formal opening, and the networking, and particularly, Mr. Speaker, our involvement in the Commonwealth Business Forum, where there is great opportunity to continue to promote Cayman and the range of products, financial services products that we have, the wonderful business environment that is part of who we are, and also the Cayman Islands as a destination for visitors, for tourism.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in no way am I trying to create any difficulty for the minister, but I am certain that there are lines of communication between the Cayman Islands, whether directly, indirectly, at these events, or by way of email, or by way of phone call, or whatever line of communication that is there, that we address or communicate our concerns as an overseas territory to the UK on behalf of the topics that will be discussed. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand the minister is saying what his limitations are. He has no voting rights. He doesn't even really have any place in the discussion. These were, and I respect that, but I know that there are lines of communication in respect to the concerns. There has to be lines of communication for those concerns in one way, shape, or form. So what the question is saying is, how are you communicating those, whether it's on this trip or by way of email from the leader's position of this country? But you have to be obviously addressing or seeing the opportunity that is presented when the topics at hand at the Trogon meeting for our voice to be heard in a way of saying, these are the concerns for an overseas territory, if you can take them into consideration in some way, shape, or form. So I guess to formulate the question, is the Premier now saying that there's no line of communication to raise any concerns for the Cayman Islands for it to be considered in any way, shape, or form at the Trogon meeting?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I have given a comprehensive response. The purpose of this trip and the reason why we are expending the money to do so is because we see it as an opportunity to continue to promote Cayman and to raise Cayman's profile and importance within the broader Commonwealth. I am attending as the president of the UK's Overseas Territories Association. I shall do as I have done these past many years, attempt to be the best diplomat and ambassador for these islands that I possibly can, to promote who we are, what we are, and encourage more business and respect for these islands. In the context of all of that, whatever issues we believe as a government there is some benefit in putting forward to a particular individual or minister or head of government, I shall do so in my usual way. But I am not going there with a long list of complaints or petitions on behalf of the Cayman Islands. This is a diplomatic and promotional opportunity, similar in many respects to the trip we are about to take to Hong Kong. That's how I am viewing this, Mr. Speaker.
We will suspend proceedings until 2:30 p.m.